Boom, and we're live. And well, good evening and welcome to another edition of Life is People on this fine January cold evening here in Scotland. And well, I think without any further ado, I think it's just go straight into it. And we'll tonight we're going to welcome Neil to the podcast. So how you doing, Neil?
Hey, good, doing good, Tim. Thanks for having me here.
Ah, it's cool. For the people who are very observant and have kind of followed this journey all the way through the line, this is not your first appearance. We kind of cross paths, but that's another kind of avenue to go down. And I definitely recommend people to go down and check the answer meeting because I think they're always a fascinating conversation. But our paths only just generally, came sort of cross recently, Neil, because you sort of like came across the sort of paths on the SafeNet forum, and you sort of wandered into that world. So I think the really sort of good place to start would be, what was the sort of steps that led you into sort of stumbling across MaidSafe in your life?
Well, okay. This is something that only a few people know. I was battling severe depression after my last startup, and anyone that's run a startup knows that it's actually takes a lot out of you. You effectively, lose a good part of your life, completely devoting yourself to something mentally and physically, giving it your all. And that can take its toll on your body. That can take its toll on your mind. And so I decided to just kind of step back from it all and kind of rethink priorities in my life. I already had a fair bit at this point where I didn't need to, have this constant struggle. And I'll tell you, I came to this realization that my desire for money and capitalistic intentions is what really basically was killing me inside. So what I did gain from that was financial freedom, but at what cost, right? So if I were to live that part of my life again, I certainly wouldn't be focused on financial motivations or material things. I would do things very differently. I would try to involve as many people as possible, and go down a road with mutual cooperation rather than trying to kill yourself trying to do it by yourself, or do it with one or two people. So yeah, I could say that it was a similar feeling that if I were to use a metaphor, I would say, like the Matrix movie, just that feeling of being unplugged from the Matrix, where you start to see things differently. Like movies just don't appear the same anymore. You see hidden agendas in almost everything. And you start to see things where things that are in place that keep you believing in the economic and government models that we have going on today, kind of shows you that if you stop believing in it, it stops working. And that living in that kind of a facade, I never saw myself as being a person that would go willingly into something like that, into something like a 1984 Orwellian model, I, with Wi-Fi, of course. So I didn't like that, and yeah, that's what led me to this point. Led me to consider decentralized models. Decentralization of the internet, to me, is a very crucial piece. Um, and yeah, that's why I'm here.
So, I think your the sort of path you've gone down is a very similar path to a lot of. I know a lot of people in my own circle and a lot of people I've spoken to have come down to that very path of what you just come down to. It's like you said, it's that wake up moment. Whatever that wake up moment is, for however people approach to it, it's always that, like you say, it truly is a wake up moment because you do realize, like you say, you start to see everything as a it's kind of like you said in the Matrix, you almost see everything covered in this stickiness, this glue of an old world thinking, and you start to realize it's everywhere. And like you say, it really does penetrate. And the thing that where I think this is something where I think it's fascinating about the whole of decentralization and in the whole thing in general. Is this something that how we've I think as a species we've got it's got to come to this point. This is why I think it's a crucial paradigm shift we're going through at the moment. I think it's crucial this happens is because I think a lot of the general mental health illnesses around the world are caused by, like you said, just everyone being on the same treadmill, and it's just we're getting to this almost heightened madness where we can't the system can't take any more of it, either from a technical point of view, logical point of view, as in the amount of servers and how it can all just run, but equally on the human us as human beings. And I think this is the wake up moment that people are going through. And I think decentralization and things like MaidSafe are really starting to open the door to this. Is kind of understanding to people that there's more to life than just getting on that treadmill, running around, doing all the things that you've been taught you should be doing. And this is the scariness, I suppose, and the liberating thing of decentralization in its essence. So for those who are sort of aware, I know you've been kind of, again, you can. Again, I'd say to people, go and explore. You can go and find on videos on YouTube of your interview in 2000. I found it quite fascinating. In 2011, you were talking about Bitcoin and stuff. So you were quite an early adopter back then. So, from your sort of 5 years on, from that point where you would talk about Bitcoin and stuff. I mean, you mentioned in that, I only mentioned that in that video discussion I watched earlier on. You mentioned how you sort of saw how in the next decade, this is in 2011, you thought the whole process would be kind of mapped out and it would be really sort of taking over. 5 years on, halfway through that kind of projection you have, how do you feel about things now?
Yeah, I think we're progressing on the same path. I think that back then I saw Bitcoin as more technology that was going to facilitate a decentralized internet. And if you look at the internet today, yeah, it's not decentralized. I mean, but it is getting there. There's so many solutions. There are so many solutions now coming up that are paving the way for that. Bitcoin still hasn't been stopped, and there are plenty of other solutions on the horizon. Even take BitShares or Ethereum, and then you have the MaidSafe, you have the Safe Network, right? And the Safe Network, to me, is trying to tackle the decentralization from a slightly different angle, technologically speaking. And what I like from it is it's a very efficient system if you can get it completely bug free, right? If you can get all the kinks out of that system. But yeah, I guess I would say that in about 5 more years, you can ask me that same question, and I hope that we're much further along in the decentralization movement. But I think so far it's very promising that a lot of the people that I speak to in the startup world are thinking about decentralization.
Yeah, I mean, on to sort of linger on that point about Bitcoin and stuff like this, and I just wanted to sort of tie this in with you mentioned when you were very sort of your sort of steps that led you to this point, and I know you mentioned about Bitcoin as well. Now, I'm fascinated to know what your thoughts are on Bitcoin and how that's perceived generally, about how it's always down to the value of what it is, down to a fiat currency, or what its value to gold is, or it's always about the value of this thing to and it seems to be, like you say, almost this, I don't know how to use this word, but almost there's a dripping of that capitalism. It's all about how much what I'm holding in my hand is going to be worth to somebody else, and it all tends to be about value of the down to gold or silver and stuff. Whereas the difference compared to that, as compared to the Safe coin and what the whole Safe network is offering, is that it doesn't really matter about your Safe coin because it's a value of its intrinsic value. So I'm interested to know what your point. I've read some sort of some of your comments on the forum as well, which again people can go away, read about how your thoughts on Bitcoin and how you feel about that compared to what your opening statement was. So again, I'll be fascinated to hear while we're on this point about how you sort of feel Bitcoin is going to proceed in the future. But do you think it's, that's what I'm saying? I personally, I'll just give you my two pennies worth. I personally think that the focus has been completely on Bitcoin. It's all been about the value, and I think that's going to be basically, it's going to be its downfall. I mean, I think there's a lot of technical issues about it, but I think the idea of it all being, which is at the moment everyone focus on Bitcoin being this money thing. Okay, maybe, but I don't see the blockchain being a money thing. I think the blockchain is going to really open up and have tremendous disruptive power into things like how, which is something you discussed, law fortress, and how we deal with contracts and stuff. That's a very powerful tool. But when I think that my personal thing about Bitcoin and as a currency will always be, well, it's still traceable, and that's what I don't like about it. I think there's the element of, if you want to, like you say, step out of that Orwellian nightmare, then I don't want any traceability at all. So I'm just giving you my sort of thoughts, and I'm interested to know, because I was saying you've done some fascinating articles on the SafeNet forum about it. So I'm very fascinated to hear from your point of view what you sort of feel about, how you sort of square the two circles, really, about what you mentioned earlier about the idea of getting human beings depressed because of the idea of value, and Bitcoin having its whole sort of almost what it's all about, being about value. So I'm interested to see how you sort of square those two circles.
Yeah, well, Bitcoin, for example, much like the points you already mentioned, I think that its failure is going to be related to it moving more and more to a centralized mining structure. If you look at the two of the top miners right now, even if you take the top four miners, that's already over 50% of the mining. People have brought up this point earlier on itself, back when it was 20 miners that controlled, over 50%, and now it's 4, right? So pretty soon you're going to have Bitfury and BTC China control majority of the mining power. Now, what that brings about is, like, if you are looking for anonymity, if you're looking for the fundamental rights to privacy for transactions, you're going to lose that. The thing that's driving Bitcoin right now is greed. At the core, that's what it is, right? It's we as an organism, we tend to move towards the survival of the fittest model in any given path. So with Bitcoin, it happens to be financial motivation. So people are doing things purely because it makes financial sense. You take companies like Bitfury and BTC China, you'd be surprised what their thoughts are on anonymity. They're actually fine with giving that up because they're making a lot of money. And therein lies the problem when everyone has their price. So whether you started off with intentions to keep things on an even playing field, it eventually falters because somebody with money comes along and says, hey, if you want Bitcoin to be legalized, if you want Bitcoin to, if you want your mining facility to be at the top, and if you want to continue this this way of life, and you want to continue this way of so that your company can prosper, you gotta cooperate with us to make Bitcoin more traceable, and so I'm seeing these things happen. So from a decentralization point of view, I think it is a failure, and that's partly why I don't really back Bitcoin. I back the technology. I back I back blockchain like databases. It depends on what kind of solution you're working towards. But I don't think Bitcoin is going to make it, and that's why that's the fundamental reason. It's just the core philosophy of Bitcoin. What it was isn't what it is today. Decentralization in. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say along that line. You as a coder, do you actually dig into any of the code of Bitcoin or some of the like NXT proof of stake type. Do you look into that? And what do you think is necessary in order to move over to proof of stake? Have you looked at anything that Greg Meredith is doing for Casper, which is what Ethereum is going to be moving over to? Apparently, they solved a couple of major problems, they think, in some of the Achilles heel of what blockchain people would say, or proof of work people say, is the Achilles heel. Is like there's two problems, like nothing at stake, and then the fact that whoever owns the majority is going to be getting all of the rewards and going into the future.
Yeah.
What do you
Yeah, I mean, in terms of proof of stake versus proof of work, I think that proof of work, at least in Bitcoin's case, none of the work is really loyal to Bitcoin. I mean, you have infrastructure spending. Like, look at Bitfury. They spent $20 million just on their new facility. That isn't necessarily loyal, because in 6 months, if their ASIC miners are outdated, where's the loyalty there? Like, what is keeping them loyal to Bitcoin? Is it just the amount of money that they've spent on the infrastructure? So that's the proof of work model. But I mean, you take proof of stake as well. I'm not totally sold on proof of stake either, because look at BitShares, where a good majority of the people that own BitShares are the ones that control. I mean, well, they can effectively put themselves in a position where they can change the rules of how many coins are mined, how many. They can just change the rules, and of course, yeah, it matters on who follows them afterwards, right? But in terms of
like, it can get kind of messy too quick, doesn't it? I mean, if somebody throws a wrench into the system, the value plunges 30-40%. Their black swan events make it to where their bit USD, bit silver, bit yuan, everything gets kind of blurry real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your earlier point about digging into the code, I have digged through the Bitcoin source code. I've even created like a few altcoins just for fun. But I wouldn't say that I'm an expert in the technology. I more look at it from a higher level. I look at it as what can be done with a blockchain stateless system versus a distributed hash table like the one that's implemented in the Safe network. So to me, like, that side of things kind of just seems a lot more appealing to me. The Kademlia-based approach that Safe Network is going with. But yeah, it is because I see everything being distributed kind of in this even manner, and that's what kind of brings me towards that. But in the end, all of these technologies, they further bolster no central point of failure. They bolster decentralization. They bolster moving away from an Orwellian future, and that's what I like about this time that I'm in right now. No matter what, we're going to come up with a solution that eventually people are going to go with, right? So it's just a matter of time, and we're all working towards a common goal. There are problems with existing systems, but at least people are they're coming together, and in one shape or another, they're working towards a solution, towards decentralization. So it's good.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating. The point you just mentioned, and you mentioned this name, it comes up 3 times now, Neil, in a conversation, and it's always something I've always been a strong, not believer in the sense, but I know it's kind of a strong knowledge of this, that a lot of the thought processes that lead us to where we are. Look, in this conversation, you've mentioned George Orwell 3 times, and that's a perfect example of what I'm talking about, how the people that can come from different angles, and that's why I think it's really good that the creatives and people meet, and that's what I love about, that's what excites me about decentralization, of the ability for human beings to connect. So on these the 2 things, I mean, you mentioned George Orwell a lot there, and again, it's a very, like you said, Orwellian future, and there's plenty of novels that people can read, and plenty of his short stories, where he portrays his future, not just Animal Farm. There's lots, not just 1984. There's a great body of work that describes that. But and it's something that boils down to this sort of central question, really. Why is decentralization something that's so that you're sitting there having this conversation about? What is it that is so the why question? Why decentralization? I mean, you've mentioned George Orwell, and that's a very obvious kind of reason why people can understand about the idea of privacy and not being able. But to you personally, Neil Haran, here we are, 2016, my friend. Why is decentralization to you as a person, with all the, like you said, you've had success. I mean, anyone can find out roughly what your history is. So you've had all the things that this world can offer. But why beyond that is decentralization such a drive for you as a human being?
Okay, well, so apart from avoiding a totalitarian regime where you're under the control of the few, I would say that decentralization promotes democracy. In fact, it is a good solution towards democracy. Right now, we don't have that. Can you imagine a world right now without decentralization where your data is private, where it's secure, where you're interacting with peers on an even playing field? Right now, it doesn't work like that. So even if you take finding answers, right? So you're going on the internet and you're trying to find answers on a specific topic. How do you know what answers you're getting are correct, right? Especially if you're looking for answers in the political field, you can clearly see the problems there, right? The answers you're getting are what the media sources are kind of guiding you towards, right? Facebook, Google, it's pretty clear to me that the videos that they want you to watch, the news feeds that show up on your Facebook newsfeed, it is it's not necessarily the right answer. It's the popular opinion, but it's also what they can control that, right? They can make sure that if you post something that goes against what the political what the powers or whatever don't want, I mean, your article, whatever you post, is not going to be seen by anyone. So that level of control is a pretty scary thing. It's scary that they have that much control over your perception of reality. And if you fundamentally, all of us have our own perception of reality, right? And then there's only one reality. So obviously we have where our perception of reality, if we strive to try to get that as close to the actual reality, then one could say that we have a thirst for knowledge, or we have a thirst for getting at the truth. But how do you do that when somebody else is controlling that perception? I believe that decentralization can even the playing field. So you're still going to have a lot of problems, but at least it's an even playing field in which everyone's competing to control your perception, right? Because that's their perception. And eventually, I believe that we're going to have people start to look at sources on decentralized networks. They're going to look at certain people as being more knowledgeable than other people, and eventually it's just going to work its way out. But it's going to be an even playing field. It's not going to be because Facebook says that this person is someone that you should be listening to, right? Or Google or because they happen to spend a lot of money, getting a lot of votes their way, right? So, but yeah, I mean, decentralization also opens up doors in terms of take the music industry right now. Musicians, any artist, writers, they all have to kind of they have to go towards publishers, and where publishers kind of control their fate. They give them very little, and then they say, well, we're gonna you don't have any other options, right? So with writing at least, and with music now, things are changing, of course, but still, it is still driven by how much you pay advertisers and how much you pay media. Whereas I think if you had more peer-to-peer solutions, you could have music and file sharing and knowledge sharing that uh, the content producers are directly taking to the consumers, and the consumers can pay whatever they want to pay, and or either way, the content will be without middlemen, and
Hmm.
that's really a huge thing. So yeah.
No, I think you're right, Neil, and I think even beyond, like you said there, is even beyond the what Facebook or what Google do. Like you say, this is the whole point. It's all of us on this planet, and man, I always with any situation, I always think, okay, take us out of maybe our situation and put the same world that was on the same planet, and you take somebody from, I don't know, deep in the Amazon, and they have the same. They might not have Google and Facebook, but there'll be certain, like you say, norms and middlemen, and it's just this. I think it's a natural progression, and I do. I think when we look back at the whole of history, we see this progression towards let's wipe out the middlemen, and it's all. To me, that's why I think it's inevitable, because I think, as you just said then, it's a push and a pull. Once you have more knowledge coming through, and you have this, the ability of humans is what I think is intrinsically as us as a species, we have this, like nature itself, with this ability, we have this almost essence just to go and connect with each other and find out knowledge and seek, and that's what's that whole, that's why we've always gathered each other around in groups and looked after each other. That's why we go, and if someone falls over, we make sure it's that intrinsic part of us, and that's that urge inside of all of us to have direct knowledge without any middleman is what has led us to this point. And then you see what the potential of, like, the internet part two, which is what SafeNet's going to do and other ops technologies are going to bring. And like you say, and you all those middlemen just disappear. Now, this is something I know we would talk about earlier on this afternoon about education, and I think that's going to be a big focus, and our, this very point about tapping into this knowledge. Now, you were mentioning it's something that you've got a lot of passion for, and you're about making education fun. So we kind of spoke about it briefly, but again, tell me more about how you sort of see and what your sort of thoughts are on trying to make and how you can use a safe network and sort of weeding it into making education fun.
Well, so the last company that I had was Rawbots, which was a robot building game where you construct robots just like Lego, and you can program them with this visual programming language. It was to try to encourage encourage learning about engineering concepts, and through a fun video game. So that's kind of the direction I'm going with education and gaming is to try to bring that game into educational institutions. So build a curriculum around learning math, learning physics, learning coding, all in a very fun way of learning. So a lot of psychologists have done research on how our brains learn and retain information. And memorization is a very poor way of doing that. You're not retaining anything. So we can do better. So right now, what is the quickest path to getting someone to understand information? So understanding information requires, a good way would be if you did some action while you're learning something, right? So there's the applicability of or the practical applications of theoretical knowledge. So with the robot building game, for example, my vision is to try and bridge that gap between having a fun interactive environment in which you can interact with other players. There's competition. There's addiction as well, because you're addicted to winning. You're addicted to building better robots, and you're addicted to learning. And all those things, I think, kind of make you learn better. So that's kind of the angle that I'm going with education and gaming. But in terms of gaming on the safe network, for example, there are a lot of challenges to be done, but I think to be overcome. But if you look at it from the advantages of the safe network, I would say that safe network has good data distribution. It is much cheaper to do something on the safe network in terms of multiplayer than if you were to have your own servers. Um, so, but it depends on the type of game you're trying to make as well. But I think you can have a very good community, and you can have an open community, share different robot designs on this uh, distributed hash table, and you can promote a lot of knowledge sharing, all in a fun, friendly environment. So that's kind of the direction I'm going with for like gaming and learning on top of the safe network.
Now, this is something that maybe from your experience of your where you sort of come from and stuff like this. And I was wondering if I'm not particularly asking you to sort of tell me any sort of previous experience, but I particularly thought of that one of the things that's going to be a really big kind of would help would be the idea that people from all around the world, for whatever languages that they've got at the moment, can communicate. Now, obviously, from your experience with like Rawbots and just other things, projects you had before, I'm sure that must have come up in a conversation. Like, how do you get a kid who's in China, who's playing on that online game at the same time as a kid who's in Greece? How do you get them to communicate? And then that, obviously, we're still kind of come across the problem of language. So is that something I personally think if we could just have the day that somebody comes up with the ability to communicate, through a multi sort of almost an app that could, decipher language at a very great speed, which again, the safe network and obviously with the background and how it's working will eventually give because of the supercomputing power of it all. But how do you sort of see those? Because I think that's a blockage at the moment. And you're just saying about education, because that's one of the things about the whole world at the moment. People, if you're born in a ghetto in the middle of I don't know, Johannesburg or the middle of Caracas, you didn't have any choice about that. But so your education is determined about the resources that the local area has. Then it depends on the teacher, or like you say, and on top of that, you've got all these. Basically, all education is they're teaching you their history, their whatever. So, like I say, the disruptive element of decentralization and the made safe and safe network and projects like this and platforms like this is going to be the ability that kid in Caracas can go, wow, I can have the same amount of knowledge as the kid who's in a private school at Harvard, but still fundamentally, even though that knowledge is there, it's still trying to find those ways that kid in Caracas can get hold of that knowledge, and he's not put off by barriers of language. So I know that's a very me is looking at it from my angle, but from someone who's on a technical angle, is there any? How does someone from a coding angle approach that, or is that something that's even thought about? And if it is, what would be the steps towards that? I mean, how can we as a community try to sort of find ways to reward people to find solutions towards this, to me, fundamental problem of basic human language?
So first I'll address the problem of language, right? So there are so many universal ways in which we communicate. And there are languages like math, for example, which is universal. So math, physics, and if you think about it, computer programming as well. So access to information, of course. Right now, a big bottleneck happens to be English, right? If you have most of the current technology, most of the current education, most of the cutting edge stuff is presented in English first. Mm-hmm. And then if somebody bothers to translate it into another language, then it'll be made available in that language. But in terms of a gamer in China interacting with somebody in Russia, they actually did do that with the Rawbots game. The people were sharing different ideas on how they were building robots. And in the game, we had this concept called a blueprint. So where you could create your machine, whatever machine it was, and you could save it as a blueprint, which allows anyone to be able to get access to that blueprint and immediately use that machine and build on top of it. It was hard to get that blueprint from one person's machine to another because we had to put it on Dropbox or we had to put it on other cloud sharing things. I mean, it wasn't as easy as having a decentralized cloud where you just throw that blueprint up there and somebody could just grab it and pick and choose which blueprints they want and be able to see the code that was on that piece of robot and learn from it. So that would be an example in which a person from another country who may or may not speak English could learn from someone else who may or may not speak English in more of a universal language of building machines and building robots, because building machines is universal, right? It doesn't require, it's language agnostic. What was there were more points that you're making. I can't remember.
No, it's all right. As I said, I was mentioning that's kind of really covered a lot of it with this, but it's the link between gaming and connecting people, and I that's what I'm saying. I've always been. As you know, I'm very. Daniel was the very first time I came across Daniel on this podcast. He was showing me about how, ideas he had for gamifying the safe network, because I think it's a very good way that it's already in process at the moment, as you just said, and you've already had experience of people already in 2016 are doing this. They're connecting around this sort of principle, and that's what I'm saying. I think this can be really spilled into education because it can be connecting. That's what I'm saying. These people from different parts of the world and in whatever environment they're born in, which isn't their fault. Nobody chooses to be born in a back slum of Caracas. That's not their. But everybody should have the ability to get out of that situation, and that's what I'm saying. I think gamifying can be a really way to sort of push that forward, and I think, like you say, can make it in that environment, because and again, this is maybe a lead-on question I'd like to ask you. I mean, you mentioned obviously about how you sort of see the potential of maybe safe network for gamifying. Do you think that's going to be an inevitable path we're going down to, and do you think it's going to get to the point where we're going to inevitably people are going to be switching on to like Oculus Rift and into the virtual world, or do you think that's just going to be just a supplement we can just tap into and walk away from? I mean, how do you sort of see that whole, for someone from your gaming experience, I mean, how do you sort of feel about the potential like safe network, Oculus Rift, and these all sort of coming together? And I mean, what's your thoughts on that whole kind of where that could go?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of problems to tackle when you are going to peer-to-peer, right? And when you're going to decentralization. For example, in gaming, you can do, so there are generally two types of games. There's the asynchronous, two types of multiplayer games. There's the asynchronous variety and there's the synchronous gaming. Asynchronous gaming would be like the Farmvilles and the types of games where you could do something and you're not interacting with someone in real time. You're just kind of doing your thing and they're doing their thing, and you're comparing notes afterwards, right? You're competing with each other on an individualistic basis, right? You're kind of just leveling up that way. But when you get to high twitch, the network latency becomes an issue, and cheating also becomes an issue. So where there's no central governing authority, like how would you determine the validity of a state in your game? So take a safe network for example. They are using Kademlia for managing their distributed hash table and their nodes, right? But in Kademlia, you would tend to rely on the consensus of your peers to determine the validity of the state of your game, right? So that would be the way they would go about solving cheating or something like that. But it's very hard to get that to be low latency. Now, I'm not saying that that's impossible. I'm saying that given enough time, people are going to have faster internet connections, and it's just going to evolve from that point. So in 2 years, we're probably going to all have gigabit internet connections. Some countries already offer this. I mean, where I live in Vancouver, you can get a gigabit connection if you're willing to pay a little bit more. So in the U.S., I don't know when Comcast or AT&T is going to provide that, but they might have to in a couple of years. So when you're dealing with gigabit connections, now you're talking about latency being less and less of an issue, right? You still have to do the hops when you're trying to find peers within this big giant cord, or like Kademlia or whatever. You still have to find your peers. So there's still going to be some latency that you're going to have to deal with. Is it going to be a perfect system? No, but we'll get used to it because you're getting a lot more in different ways. In terms of decentralization, take education for example. Even if you separate like technology, you just talk about the way people interact with each other. You're actually seeing a lot of decentralization that have already taken place. Look at YouTube. People are sharing videos, and people are educating each other. People are, of course, sharing their opinions, and people love giving advice. So all of that is already happening on a decentralized level. Sure, there's some manipulation happening with certain videos, getting more views because, YouTube says, okay, well, they're preferred partner or whatever. But in the end, you're still having people sharing content in a decentralized manner. Just it happens to be using centralized technology. Now, so from a technological perspective, we're not decentralized yet, no. But from a processes and operational methodology, you're seeing a lot of decentralization happen. Look at Uber. Uber completely destroyed the taxi industry, which was a big giant monopoly, and Uber made it so that anyone with a car, with a car, and of course, they have to go through their background checks and everything, but it still decentralized the taxi model. So you're seeing a lot of decentralization taking place, even if you don't take technology into consideration. But the next step is to bring technology into the mix and make it truly decentralized, not just in terms of processes, but in terms of actual usability. So you can prevent corruption, you can prevent censorship. But it's not going to be an easy road. But I like that we are tackling the problem right now, and hopefully with and that's why I admire the works of teams like MadeSafe. They make their technology open source, and they are contributing to the solution and facilitating other people to also contribute to that solution. So, I know that it is going to eventually be solved. It's just a matter of time. We have to find solutions to things like the Sybil attack and the Byzantine fault tolerance problem. Those are problems that exist in a peer-to-peer, a decentralized decentralized network like Safe Network, especially. But we're going to solve those problems eventually, and I'm hopeful that we'll solve those problems. So.
One of the things that again, someone from your kind of your knowledge and experience, and as you see from your view, your position, and as you see it right from where you're sitting right now, and it's hard to. I'm not asking you to make any predictions and stuff. I'm just asking for your viewpoint. I mean, what parts of the world do you think are best? This is coming. I mean, decentralization is coming. MadeSafe, the Safe Network, and I'm not going to put any time scales on this, but at some point, between now and the future, a very short, medium-term time is going to come, and the whole decentralization is going to happen. But if I said to you, maybe if it was to happen within the next sort of 2 years, right now, what parts of the world do you think are generally more suited towards that? And I mean in the sense of, like people know about China has, you know, big firewalls and they won't let get things through, and other places have language, you know, that's their problem because like you mentioned earlier on, they can't, the whole of most stuff is written in English. So if you've got no understanding of English at all, but these are the sort of things I'm talking about. So from your position and your knowledge and your skills and from what you know how you see things, what parts of the world do you think right now are kind of best suited for all this? You know, what's about to happen?
So, well, let's just take Bitcoin for example, right? It is a decentralized currency, at least for the moment. And you know, if you take where it's being used, for example, it's used in countries like Argentina. It's used I mean, actually used between peers, and because they don't trust their own currency. Right now, a good part of Chinese investors in Bitcoin are using it for money laundering purposes, to take money out of China. So right now, I do see a lot of decentralization technology used to free yourself from the government, to free yourself from oppression. So a lot of the countries that are dealing with oppressive regimes are going to probably try to adopt decentralized technology. I mean, if you look at how Bitcoin is being used in Vancouver, for example, it's still a novelty. Here, people that own Bitcoins are just owning it. Well, I mean, they're owning it in large part also to keep their to trade it, to keep their funds maybe away from tax authorities. Well, tax evasion is a big one, but ultimately, a lot of people are holding Bitcoin here because it's a novelty, you know. So I do see more practical uses in countries where there is oppression and where there's a genuine lack of trust with government bodies. So, and that's I think that answers the question. I'm not sure what else.
No, that's not, I mean, I'm fascinated with this because like you say, I mean, Bitcoin's a very good example because I try to say to as many people as possible. I mean, I talk to a lot of people in your part of the world, in America, Canada, and obviously your perception of Bitcoin compared to what if I was to pull the average person, you know, in my town over here and ask them about Bitcoin, they wouldn't have a clue. And that's very, I just what I'm saying. I think we've seen with Bitcoin, we've seen this kind of experiment now for maybe 6-7 years, and I can see the sort of parts of the world. It's like you said, Argentina is a perfect example. That's because they suffered the crash. But that's what I'm trying to say. I think the safe network, because it's not basically, and we were tapping into earlier on, it's not about intrinsically in value about what it's you know what it's going to be worth for one currency to another. This is about a more fundamental level of disruption and decentralization, because it's basically saying, look, this is all about connecting to the internet part too, and that's a bigger thing than just, you know, making it about that. So that's why I was asking, and I think you're right, Neil. I think it's going to be, I don't know, it's one of those oral sort of stories that's come through many religions and many sort of parables all around the world, and it's always been this sort of parable about how the meek will inherit the earth. And I think this is the moment we're going to see. I think the meek will inherit the earth, because it's going to be basically those people who have suffered under this, you know, we're in that, you know, this conversation is the very fact that we're in this 1%. You know, we are that, but that other part of the world, they're going to inherit the world very quickly, because they're used to living on their own wits. They're used to understanding this, the concept of decentralization on a day-to-day basis. You know, and once they get it, I'm agreeing with you, Neil. I think we're going to see. I think the world could be a completely different place. In right now, we may look at some little country and we don't even know where it is in the map in Africa, and then 10 years time it could be the power base of everything, because they've got all this knowledge and they've really utilized it, you know, and they've come out of the herd before anybody else. And I think you're absolutely right. So you know, I would agree with you there, Neil, and I think on the whole of this, go on, sorry.
I was going to say, have either of you watched Thrive? It's
No.
It's if you go I'll bring it up because I'll post it in the side notes in a little bit. But thrivemovement.com, I think, is what it is, and it was started by his last name is Gamble, and he's actually from Procter and Gamble. His family ran it. He said he was being groomed, to be a part of that system when he decided he needed to look and see what's wrong with the world, try to understand why the world is the way it is, why so many people are not thriving, why they are under the thumb, basically, and basically oppressed. And it's a great documentary. It's about an hour and a half, 2 hours long. And yeah, he covered some really important ground in that video with respect to how do we move forward. And he interviewed one woman who had something kind of nice to say. She basically compared the state of the world to a caterpillar. And caterpillars, they'll eat 300 times their weight in very little time. It looks like they're just ravaging everything, destroying everything in their path, and the next thing that you know, they're stuck. They hang themselves upside down, they form a chrysalis, and then these cells, they basically become a gelatin for a new type of cell, which becomes the butterfly. And this woman compared this new emerging economy. She wasn't talking about decentralization, but I think that's what it boils down to. This new economy that's going to basically discover itself without, we're basically going to bypass the old system. We're not going to fight it because it's basically has engorged itself so much and everybody sees it for what it is. We're like that cell inside of the chrysalis that is now just starting to get going, and pretty soon, once everything's set up right, we're going to break free of that chrysalis, and there's going to be a new economy, a new world, and it's going to. This is a very, optimistic view, but I'd like to think that it could happen, that it is happening, and this is I'm going to look for it online and I'll type it up there. I put this little up here, Experience Nirvana, on the top right. You probably looked at the link. It was a company that created a device that you basically, I think it somehow spurs the brain to release dopamine or some type of chemical that makes you feel excited and high and whatever. The basic idea being it would probably be for people who needed that little extra oomph, and they kind of made it to where it goes with music, and maybe it releases a little bit of extra dopamine as you're listening to the music. The reason I thought about it is because you all were talking about how do you get people interested in doing things online and creating, and I wondered, could that type of technology be used in education, right? Where when the person is learning, as they're learning, when they make a connection or answer something right, there's a little extra kick of dopamine, so they're encouraged to be thinking about what it is they're learning that much more acutely. Anyway,
actually, that's how it works. Actually, that is how games like so that's what actually gamification really is. It's this compulsion loop that gets you to do an action, do something else, and then release dopamine, and so get a reward, right? You're seeing these flashy things, and you're having this feeling of advancing, and you're having this feeling of happiness tied to a reward that you're getting for an action that you're doing. If that action that you're doing happens to be education related, you're effectively going to be addicted to learning. So it's absolutely. And then I really liked your example that you gave with the metamorphosis of what's actually happening right now, the caterpillar, if you will, right? And I think that the decentralization, if you look at the decentralization movement, we're like this organism that's, well, look, if you take the human race in this petri dish, right, and we're following a certain path right now, and once you add some kind of catalyst in one area, it's going to create a major change.
Yes.
Right? And that major change is that catalyst is decentralization. So it's hard to predict exactly where we're going to go, because there's going to be good with the bad, right? There's always a balance. And with lack of government control and with whatnot, there's also anarchy, right? And there are other things, but hey, it might bring us together as people, where it might even facilitate a barter-based economy or mutual cooperation, where we're cooperating with each other to succeed. But we have to change ourselves when we move towards this new model, and it's going to happen. It's just how long it's going to take to make that happen. So one thing we're going to have to move past is a herd mentality right now. Like herd mentality, like following other people simply not based on whether they're right or wrong, is just based on whether that's the popular opinion. Now, once we transcend from thinking like herd mentality, once we start um, thinking about things more objectively and having logic and reason with every single thing that we're thinking of, we are going to be if the whole masses are doing that as a collective, then we're going to see radical change. We're going to see radical behavioral change. We're going to see a different world. So I do think that decentralization is going to facilitate a lot of those things. But there's good with the bad. It isn't all good. We have to work through the kinks, and the way we do that is first implement the system, and then slowly work out the kinks. So I think the metamorphosis will definitely happen, and I'm looking forward to at least some prospect of change. So it'll be good.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go on, Rich.
I was just thinking, I read something about the Davos meeting in Switzerland that the big boys and girls do every year. The IMF meets there, the big banks, the JP Morgans and all these Deutsche Bank, they all get together and they talk about things. And they actually brought up Bitcoin this year. And it was kind of comforting to hear them speak about it, because you could tell they still didn't really understand it, at least on some deep level. I think the guy from Deutsche Bank referred to it as surreal last year, and then this year he says, well, he's parroting what most everybody else says. Well, I'm more interested in the blockchain than Bitcoin, which is all true, but at the same time, the only reason Bitcoin has done what it's done is because it had a incentive to do so, right? The greed. But the woman from IMF, she seems like she's probably a little bit better educated on what's going on. Her comment was, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies could be very threatening to the financial system in short order. She didn't. That's not an exact quote, but that was basically the idea. And what made me think, I was like, well, it's definitely not going to be, adverse to my financial state. It's not maybe yours, but this is the whole thing. It's like you all have been sitting on this high perch for so long, controlling countries by putting them into debt. That it's only right that the tables turn about now. Of course, in their mind, well, if there's nobody guiding the sails, then everything just goes to crap. But we know that that's just the lie they want to perpetuate. People get along just fine without having somebody at the corner with a gun saying that you guys got to be nice to each other or I'll take you to prison. Most people get along just fine without those people around. But anyway. That was just a little 2 cents in there about Davos.
Yeah, I saw that video, and I agree. There were very few people on that panel that actually knew enough to talk somewhat intelligently about Bitcoin and where we're going. There was a lot of stupidity in that show as well. So I guess that's why they pay her the big bucks, right? She happens to know the most out of all the blind people, right?
Right. Yeah. I give orders to the rest of them too. That's probably
right. And yeah, of course, it's going to be a threat to their current way of the way they're currently operating, or their modus operandi, right? I think that the biggest thing that we're going to get from this is we're going to have people directly exposed to other people, and technologies that pit people, with other people, and get that interaction happening without censorship, without barriers, without control, there's a lot of positives that I could take from all of these technologies around decentralization.
Well, I think just to sort of stick to that analogy point of view, and I think it's sort of both the points you're both making, and I don't think it really needs, if you like you said earlier on, Neil, if you just look at us as a species, this is us just reflecting nature. This is what nature does. You put a bunch of cells into a petri dish, they will form. You add a repulsion and you add attraction. That's all. It's a very simple formula. You just put anything in, add attraction and a repulsion, and they will form. This is what they're starting to understand. I mean, that's actually now how they're doing a lot of city planning, and you understand that nature forms its structures far better than we can ever sensory control. So I think this is the point. I think we've lived through this age of information we're in now, and I think still to us to enter this new paradigm, the biggest shift we've all got to do is just strip this ego away from us, and just to understand that we're just nature reflecting ourselves, and that's why I think we're going to go to where, as you said, it's all just forming around connecting, sourcing knowledge, and that happens when the middlemen and the barriers are broken down. And that's the way you break down middlemen and barriers, is basically that when you get people to understand that, wow, I can be rewarded for what I do. I can have the bravery or the substance, the ability for someone behind me to break away from the working 9 to 5 and stuff, because this is what fills me with so much optimism about the future in general. Maybe not in my lifetime, maybe in our kids' lifetime, I don't know. Is the very fact of, once you do release the human being from the slavery of time and having to get, and all the madness that brings about people getting in cars and spending hours and driving through traffic, all that, you just take away all that and you just let them release their own potential. I think it's a really, that to me is one of the most exciting things that I really look forward to with what's going to happen with the decentralization and the safe network stuff, because it's going to release this massive wave of human potential and going, wow, okay, it's a bit scary because I'm left by myself. Okay, some people feel like that, but a lot of people are going to go, wow, great, and then let me explore, just like the printing press was done. And this is what I'm saying, it's inevitable elements we've been, and all we're seeing now is this, like you said, the people who want the control, and it's just dying remnants. They're like the bishops, in the face of knowledge. They're going to crumble, and it's all going to disintegrate. And like you said, they're going to pump out, like you're both just saying, oh, it's fear and it's this, that, and the other. No. We got here. We this is. We could have been 100 years ago. You could have been 500 years ago. And they said, oh yes, but without the Catholic Church, we're all going to be. No, we're here. We're fine. We're fine as a species, and I don't think. That's what I'm saying. I think it always boils down to, there's two sides of life. There's the fear element and the love element. And if you just take the fear element and that's what makes us all back into corners, stay in our houses, lock ourselves away. We become this this paranoid species, or there's a power of love that says, go out, connect. And which one drives nature? Which one drives us? Which one's got to this point? That's why I always say to people, why are we talking right now? Yes, there's a lot of that fear in the world, and there's a lot of that hatred, but hey, it's the love that's got us to this point, because it's been the love of trying to connect us as human beings. That's why we're having this conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that, but we still need to realize that we need to grow further as human beings. We need to be able to realize everything that you just said. I've come across many people that don't think the same way as you or I, in terms of a blissful future where humans are interacting so cohesively with each other, right? So how do you reward those people to strengthen positive traits? How do you get them on board with a system in which it's decentralized and the consensus is governing? So everyone's governing each other, basically. And we're trying to keep each other honest, and we're trying to keep each other from, succumbing to Murphy's Law. Like, how do you do that, right? How do you solve those problems? These are things that we will need to solve as a human race if we're to get to the next level. So it isn't an easy problem to solve, but yes, I do think that it'll eventually get solved. At least I hope it does.
Yes, I think this is a fascinating times that we live in, where we are right now. Is that right now, and again, I stipulate, I don't even like to use the word artificial intelligence. There's intelligence. As David, as we all know, David Yamanaka makes a very, and I think it's the best analogy. We've got a little baby, this intelligence, and it's blinking its eyes, and it's going to make its. That's going to be a great aid to us as a human species, and that's one of the things that we haven't got to. I think sometimes you hear people going on these really long, winded discussions about, and they almost like make problems, and then they think, oh, that's a problem, and we're never going to solve it. And it's great that we do that as human beings, because that's what driven us to this point, that we strive to ask questions and stuff. But equally, you've always got to remember, that's what I'm saying, that for the first time ever, I don't know, I mean, this is another whole rabbit hole, it's exactly, but as far as we're right aware, we've got this intelligence that we're building, or it's around, it is on this planet now, that we can use. And that's going to be something I don't think many people have really comprehended about the world that could bring across, because it's got. We talk about negatives and positives. I mean, I've always used an analogy before that in the future that we get to a point where we ask artificial intelligence a really benign question like how do we get rid of spam, and it comes back with the answer, kill all humans, because that's the solution. So there is a negative and a positive about it all, but I do think that's what I'm saying. You just mentioned there, Neil, and it's something I wanted to linger on, that there is this supercomputing power that's built into the safe network that's going to be a potential great tool for us as a species to basically open up doors, because as that's what I'm trying to. I was trying to ask you earlier on, Neil. I mean, you've painted a very sort of vision about how it affected you as start this whole conversation, how it affected you as a human being. I mean, if I could say to you, okay, we solved all the problems with it, and there you are, and what would be your really optimistic, or you're like, wow, that's where, if we could get to that point, that would be that real kind of tick in the box of like where we are as I mean, is it leaving this planet? Is that a real kind of barrier? Is it the point we go, oh right, we sorted out all the food problems on the earth, we've now got everyone sorted, now we can actually go and explore space? Is that the benchmark? I'm interested to know what your benchmark of like, wow, that's when we've really kind of got to the next level, or as Rich was saying earlier on, it's that moment when we transform from the caterpillar to the butterfly. What do you think that moment will be?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that first off, we need to try to do things correctly on this planet. So I would like to see us actually make this planet work first. So we need to solve things like not having food as a commodity, the hunger problem. Right now, there's a whole host of problems as well with, what you were talking about earlier, which is if you're in a much poorer nation, you don't have access to a lot of technology that you're very limited by now, and it's causing you to get less knowledge, and it's causing you to be further stifled. And how do we, as a human race, start working more united? How do we start working? How do we stop fearing our neighbors? How do we start thinking more about solving problems as a hive mind rather than as this very disconnected disarray? Follow the popular opinion. Jenny McCarthy is right because she's a celebrity. How do we do that, right? And once we solve those things, so in a perfect world, we would have solved those things. In a perfect world, we have food growing everywhere. In a perfect world, we aren't too concerned with if this one person over here happens to be spamming everyone, or if this one person over here happens to be proving Murphy's Law correct. We're not too concerned with that because we're looking at the overall majority of people just doing the right thing and being good to one another, being helpful. Like if somebody has, like, it takes somebody 2 minutes to help somebody. Right now there are a lot of people that are not willing to help. Just simply because, oh well, pay me. That 2 minutes that I'm going to spend, helping you, it is going to be something that you can't do on your own, and I have all this knowledge, and so like how do we transcend from that model to, oh yeah, of course, it's going to take me very little time to help you. I'm going to help you, and this way I might even teach you how to do it, so you wouldn't need my help anymore. You'd be able to teach other people to do it, or I'll help you, and then you can help me with something else later on. But I'm not too concerned with whether you help me right then and there. How do we move to that? And in a perfect world, I see people just helping people without any real need for reciprocity.
Mm-hmm.
So once we, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say one of the things they outlined in the Thrive video are there's plenty of high-tech energy-producing systems. Some people call them free energy because they are, they basically will go until the mechanical parts of it disappear. And if those items, if those machines were made freely available, and people didn't have to worry about heat or it being too cold or too hot, or what do I use to cook my food, and all that's handled. There's plenty of energy to keep full spectrum LED lights on your crops that you're growing on a skyscraper full of food. And this all this stuff is already, all the technology is already there, and it's like, what do we actually have to do a crowdfund to do this? I mean, to actually make a city, at least one city, that shows everyone else this is how it can and should be done. And maybe that's what it will take. Maybe all of if everything keeps going the way it might, all of us who ended up having a lot of cryptocurrency that ended up maybe going up 1,000x, whatever, maybe that's our goal. That's what we have to do. We have to actually say, this is how it can be done, and you can either start lining up your new cities to do it right, or still be the slaves of somebody else. But in the future, it almost seems like it has to be a crowd-funded operation, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know necessarily how you go about implementing that. I mean, that's one way of doing it. Because there's so many ways in which we can solve this one problem. I'll give you one way that I'm trying to solve this problem. I'm trying to, okay, so I'm working on something on Salt Spring Island, where it is an energy-saving way of living. Very, very energy-saving and very eco-friendly way of living, in which it's also very cheap as well. And it's this concept of, well, you've probably heard of monolithic domes. You've heard of dome homes, right? So there are very cheap ways in which you can build dome homes. Now, if you were to build a dome home that's really nice, that goes away from traditional way of thinking about homes and thinking about ways in which, I have to earn this much money in order to afford this kind of home. Now you're able to live in a home that costs you next to nothing to build, but it's also structurally very sound. And you give that knowledge to people in developing countries. Now, effectively, you've kind of helped them by example. You've helped them but it's your solution, right? It is, and it's just one solution. Somebody else probably has a different solution in which they want, they think that we as people should live. So yeah, you have all of these different versions of utopia. You have all these versions of how people are trying to solve these problems. So which is the right one, right? Are we going to embrace all solutions as hey, if it works, awesome. Then we're looking at certain key metrics like cost. How many people have access to this to this way of building, or to this way of or to this information? We look at the effectiveness of each and every solution, and we come up with hey, this is a better solution, or this is better than this for these reasons. So I'm very open these days to just hearing several different kinds of solutions, because the more solutions we have, the more options we have, and I think we'll will eventually, whittle down to, more of the solutions that work for the time that we're in.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
I think the whole general sort of view of it, this is all, as well. Is the old analogy of the elephant in the room. I mean, right now, the whole of this discussion, everything we've based down to has always been the point of failure. The reason you said earlier on, Neil, about food and stuff, everything boils down to central planning. Everything, the reason. And again, people can go and find this information out. It's not hidden. It's there, but they've got to do a bit of research. But it's everything. The amount of why corn is being grown, by the amount of water that's being to grow, to feed the plant, to feed the cows that they eat. But there's so much of, and everything boils down to central planning. Now, if you just take that big elephant out of the room, and its influence it holds, we're all just influenced by this big elephant in the room, then that alone will be such a weight off our shoulders of not having to basically it's not a case of, this is what I'm saying, when the people talk about fear and all that stuff, I thought, this planet's got enough food on us. It's the old Bill Hicks joke. There's enough food on this planet to feed us all over and over again. That's not the problem. The problem is that certain people, and it's the same thing, it's like they're like, if you looked at it again from space, and you were sitting as an alien, you would see these corporations, governments, states, these people who centralize. They're like hoovers. They just go around and suck resources, and you take that out of the equation, which we can do. And the way to do that, you said, Neil, and this is how I see it. I think it's just like following nature itself. It's just like a drip, 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 and then suddenly that drip becomes a flow, and then that flow becomes, what starts off as a drip on the hill ends up being, the River Orinoco that cuts apart half of South America. That's how it happens. It's just drip by drip by drip, and making people understand you don't need to rely on that big elephant in the room. And instead of that elephant being in your room being as it is, as we're all thinking it's our friend, just take it away, and then let us find our own solutions. And there's a great power, and I think again, this is what I was trying to say about the ego of human beings. There's a great power and a great weight lifted off us as a species. We can say, do you know what? I don't know. I don't know all the answers. I don't know, and go out and reach out, and like you say, and have all. That's a really liberating element, instead of this whole process which we've all been brought up in to sort of we're all going to, because of the way we've been educated, what you mentioned earlier on, because of the central planning, because of the paradigm we live in, it's all about owning what you have really ability at, and it becoming about, I know all the answers, and I've got this, and that's it. That's how you push forward. And half the paradigm shift is just going, I don't know, reaching out. And I think I don't really think we need to sort of concern ourselves about how this and just get rid of the elephant in the room. Just get rid of central planning. Just let human beings find solutions that doesn't need other human beings telling that's the right solution, that's the wrong solution, you need to be doing. Just basically let us do that. And I think that's done by every human being walking away. And that's why this where we are right now. If anything that has tools or apps or abilities just to make anything easier for people to walk away. It's always using the analogy of, if you make it easy for people to leave England 400 years ago and go across to America, they will flood across. It's the old Bill Hicks joke. Australia, I'm Jack the Ripper. I'm Jack the Ripper. Of course. Why would you live in a rainy, horrible place and not live in Australia? Oh yeah, I'm Jack the Ripper. No, obviously people are going to jump towards that. If you can make it easy, and that's where we are right now as community members around this whole decentralized. It's making the steps easy for people, so when the general public do come along, they don't have a negative experience, and that they can make it an easy a great experience for them that's easy to use. Then that's how you just walk away from that elephant in the room. And then I don't have any worries about, it's going to cause this and cause that. And I think, no, just can we just solve the first problem, which is get rid of the central planning in the state and this corporation and government weird thing that we live in right now, because it is just an illusion, and they just done it by laws, and you take that out of the room. I think that's how it will really change everything. That's why I think we have the greatest ability within all of us, having conversations like this, the ability to spread information from one human being and then go out and tell other people. And it's being disruptive through distribution of knowledge.
Absolutely. You lead by example. and you don't know all the answers. There are going to be some people that have gone down the path that you're going down, and have come up with better solutions. And you're going to pick and choose. Oh, well, you've done this better. Oh, I'm going to incorporate that in my eco living, for example. But so it goes back to an earlier point that I was making, which is we need to transcend from the herd mentality that we have right now, which the masses currently have, and we need to transcend to being able to get information and not be easily influenced. We need to use logic and reason and go, okay, well, so I'll take dome homes for example. Dome homes haven't made it publicly as in popularity because I guess some real estate person said that looks ugly, or dome homes look weird. Dome homes protect you from earthquakes. They protect you from tornadoes. The very shape of domes, actually they've done studies that have shown that it has healing properties very similar to pyramids, where they did an experiment. Well, they did this with pyramids, but they did an experiment with they had a small pyramid where they put a plate that had a cracked egg in it, and then they put another plate with a cracked egg in it, but it wasn't in a pyramid. The one that was in the pyramid survived for many, many days, didn't get rotted. The other one started to smell after a few days. So they're already seeing a lot of cool properties with these things. But some person can just come along and say, well, I wouldn't live in a pyramid because I'm not dumb, or I'm not weird, right? And all of a sudden, how many people are going to follow that person? If Jenny McCarthy said, well, I wouldn't be caught dead living in a dome home, I don't care if it protects you from earthquakes, there are going to be a lot of people that are going to be like, well, I don't like dome homes either, because I'm not a weirdo. So, but, you make that dome home look really nice, or you have movies like Lord of the Rings, and now all of a sudden, hey, dome homes are great. I love living in a place that's covered with like a garden around the home, and I love living in a place that looks kind of mediocre from the outside, but you go inside and it looks amazing, right? And it's all about perception, and right now we have this very follower sheep mentality, and we got to get past that. Otherwise, well, it really is to the benefit of us collectively as a species if we ditch the herd mentality,
Have you,
Sorry.
No, go ahead, please, Rich.
Personally have seen Jacques Sturge's The Venus Project?
Yes, yes, I have.
Yeah, that's really impressive stuff. I mean, just from top to the bottom, he seems like he really thought everything through on what a healthy society might look like.
I did look at the Venus Project, but there were some things that I wasn't sure of. Like, I saw a lot of vegetation, I saw a lot of grass growing on the outside, I saw a lot of trees that didn't produce any food from the outside. So I was wondering how he was tackling the food solution, right? My guess is he has indoor solutions for food.
Yeah, I think in the future it just makes sense. Don't plant non-fruit bearing trees in the towns and cities. Start planting. There's lots of great plants like squash. They grow heartily in a lot of places, and you can make wonderful stew. Green beans grow really easily. Everybody should be growing edible plants everywhere. There's no reason not.
Absolutely. I mean, it's basically free. If you think about, there's so many places where water is free because it constantly rains, and there are places that have more Mediterranean climate where you're still seeing golf courses and you're still seeing large amounts of arable land where nothing is growing, nothing edible is growing, and you're still putting a lot of water and resources in maintaining those things, and you have to mow the lawn. Like, it's stupidity on a ginormous level, but
Absolutely.
we're doing this not because we're necessarily stupid. It's because we're following the collectively stupid,
Mentality, right? Everybody wants the greenest lawn, so they end up pouring all kinds of chemicals like glyphosates that give their children cancer, and it's just stupid.
Absolutely, and take off-grid living for example. Solar is a great solution it has already been proven that doesn't give you cancer, but we prefer to live in cities where there's power lines everywhere, where you are going to have, who knows what happens to you in 20 years, right? But we're choosing these solutions because
That's
for what reason?
another thing that you'll like if you watch the ThriveMovement.com video. They talk about the torus. Are you familiar with the torus, the energy field that it kind of goes up and around and down,
Like the
everything?
shape. I only know the shape, but I don't know the energy.
Yeah, well, it's the shape basically, and it's the flow of energy, and everything that's alive actually has that energy flow, and then things that have that energy flow disrupted are things that are unhealthy. And that shape is in everything from a fruit to a galaxy to an atom. Everything just has this sort of toroidal energy flow to it.
Even the magnetic energy for, like, I guess magnetic fields are kind of like that too.
Exactly, everything does, and it makes you wonder. It's like developing a society that keeps in mind the energy fields around you, to not disrupt those energy fields, keeps that in the forefront of your development of a home, of a town. It's not something you hear a lot of people talk about.
Yeah, because it's not a popular opinion. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
No, but this goes back to, Rich, and this is one of the things. I mean, again, we even the whole of what we're just discussing. This conversation would be like people. I could almost 5/6 of the world and be like, we don't work that way. We understand completely what nature's about. Our bodies are healthy. We live amongst the land because they have to, because of that very centralization I'm talking about. With the very fact that there's one, maybe a fifth of the world that are doing really well, but four-fifths are being absolutely screwed by the system. They have to live off the nature. They have to understand that. But that's what I was trying to say earlier on. These are the people that are going to be the ones that are going to inherit the earth, because one of the you were talking about cities and stuff. One of the things that the whole of what we've led this centralization to, it's made us as human beings who live in that very weak, because city life and having air conditioning and all the things and the green lawns and stuff, that's not real life, man. That's this, what I mean? It's made us weak, and people think that this is one of the things. I don't think people understand it. They think that the paradigms they live in and that this is all going to go on forever, and it's not. And what it comes down to, it breaks down to us as a human being. This is one of the things that I really hope that when we do try to, the shift we're going through, and you were saying there earlier on, Rich, about food and stuff like that. I think it's one of the things that we need to basically understand as human beings is we go. Let's understand that this vehicle that we drive around in. I know it's something that, again, Neil, and I kind of sort of like trying to clunk this way into this conversation, but you got a fascination with M&A and stuff like that, and I think you probably have a bit of an insight into that, about how much if you exercise the physical machine, how it stimulates the mind, and then it's all, we're not separated, which is what I think you're trying to make the point about how city life and how we've all become, is that we've almost become sickly as a species in this sense. We're not again fulfilling this potential of what we are as human beings, which a lot of it is understanding what you were just saying then, Rich, that we are all interconnected in some sort of way. And I just wanted to sort of, I know I'm saying clunkily, but, I know you mentioned, Neil, that you're into M&A, and I was wondering, anything the sort of the lessons that you've learned from that whole discipline of, trying to make yourself into a understanding about, the actual limitations of the human body. Is there any sort of crossover in how that's sort of played into your mindset about how you think about the world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, MMA has been a pretty big influence in my life. The people that I've trained with, they're just very good people. A lot of them had made mistakes in the past, but they overcame their troubles. They overcame a lot of the bad paths in their lives through mixed martial arts, and it was very nice. And mixed martial arts doesn't mean that you're focusing on beating up someone, right? I mean, you're training. Like, there's so many effective ways to learn. Like, my way of thinking is you can learn anything, and if it's presented in a fun, easy to learn way, in an interactive way, you're going to better yourself as a person. It's going to give you confidence walking down the street, knowing that, hey, if push came to shove, at least I know enough from training to know that I can defend myself. And that's a pretty big thing. And even if you take MMA training, so I've never competed in MMA, but I only train because I love the sport. And you actually see, because of MMA, because of moving away from traditional martial arts, so just a little bit of a background, is that it was very much about this focus of this emphasis on discipline, and very much this emphasis on following the old ways. And MMA just said, fuck all that shit. Go with what works. Okay, wrestling works. Jiu-jitsu is amazing. Boxing works. Kickboxing works. Let's combine them. Judo also works. Let's combine all of these things, and let's try to make an effective martial arts that's fun, that we can all get into. And so as a result, you have all of these martial arts like Kung Fu, and no disrespect to any of them, but you are seeing a lot of people like myself who would have been labeled a computer nerd before getting into mixed martial arts because it's just a fun thing to do. You can do it in ways, you can practice it in ways in which you don't have to compete. You can just train, and you can do it in safe and effective ways. So, and it gives you physical, it gets you to be in physical shape. It gets you to have more confidence, and it gets you to, have a lot more knowledge in something that you didn't have any knowledge in, right? So it promoted this. It promotes this this area of knowledge that a lot of people just don't know very much about. So that's what I like about mixed martial arts.
I like what Joe Rogan says about it is that it's a continual problem-solving event. When you're actually trying to take somebody down, there's a lot going on in the brain at that point. What do I do next? How do I do this? This is coming. How do I counter it? It's fascinating.
Absolutely, and Joe Rogan is, he had his black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu long time back, and then he got his black belt under Eddie Bravo, and that guy is just amazing. He's like a tactician, like master when it comes to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is, it gives you the confidence in knowing that when you're on the ground, you are not going to be beaten up. You're going to be able to defend yourself, just simply through moving your body in very effective ways. Joe Rogan is, in my opinion, one of the people that I admire the most because of what he says about that. And even, take Ed O'Neill, the Married with Children, the Al Bundy guy, right? I mean, in that show, people think of him as just that, but he's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu long time back itself, constantly training with the Gracies. And again, he's a class act in every interview that I've seen with him on this stuff. But you wouldn't have known that someone like that is so well rounded, and has so much knowledge in this sport.
That's also really that Joe Rogan points out. Watch your noggin. He's really worried about a lot of these guys going in there and getting pummeled time after time, getting knocked out multiple times, and then they end up early onset of different types of diseases. So yeah, I think it's pretty smart to keep it in a safe training mode, especially if you're a computer programmer. Absolutely,
I do not want to turn into a vegetable. I will not, and that's why I don't want to compete either. I want to do it simply because I love the sport. I love the cardiovascular training, and I love you can throw punches against someone where it doesn't hurt, and you're still getting the same benefit, and you're still learning how to kick. You're still doing all of those things. So I think it's great.
Out of curiosity, have you ever heard of anybody using Aikido?
I have respect for styles like Aikido. It's using the other person's energy against them, and it's trying to do it in a very clever way. I would love to see how it could effectively be used in mixed martial arts. I've seen a couple people who use Aikido, but they also know a fair bit of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So they kind of have a hybrid style where they have the groundwork and they have a lot of the knowledge from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but they also try to augment it with the energy kind of transference from Aikido. Yeah, I guess if you were purely doing Aikido, I think that there's a lot of things that you're going to be lacking. But yeah, I mean, the world isn't going to be much like the Steven Seagal movies. So I think when you are having to defend yourself, unfortunately, that perfect way of getting somebody to use their energy against them, it's very hard to use it in practice.
When I see Aikido, it reminds me of the Drunken Tiger or whatever that film.
Yeah, exactly, right. And how much money people have poured into learning the Tiger Claw or whatever. Yeah, fine. It could work against someone that doesn't know how to fight, but I mean, if you're trying to do the Tiger Claw against someone that knows how to move, knows how to like box, or knows how to do those things to avoid those things, I think you're gonna hurt your hand, and probably worse.
Yeah,
so.
I think you're right, Neil, and I think one of the things that you just given a perfect example. I think is, M&A in itself is a perfect reflection of decentralization, because as you said, you've had people that are coming together, just fighting styles all around the world, and it's like a live form. You're seeing which styles that work and don't work. And one of the things that I found fascinating about, again, this whole thing of M&A, it's only been around. The concept around only a few years, but one of the things I think it's been fantastic in, and it's one of the things that I grew up learning karate and stuff like this, and one of the things that used to be all the time when it was played, what you played to just then, you'd always have these like rumors like, oh, there's a school in London that can teach you with one punch is a death punch, and that didn't UFC and M&A just wipe that illusion away? And you see all these old films of like these old teachers in China, and they're doing like the punch with no even touching, and the people, it's amazing. But what really fascinates about that is, that's what I was trying to say, you're seeing in a physical form what this whole conversation has been about. The very fact that people were falling over an air punch was just this old point, because they've been conditioned to think that this old master would do it, and they dare not stand it. But isn't that just a reflection of where we are in our society? Or we can't stand against anything because it's got us to where we are now. And that's what I find fascinating, that the M&A is almost a very thing, because what we are finding out through that, like you said, is just what works and what doesn't work, and you just ditch what doesn't work and you keep what works, because in that situation when you're defending yourself, you need to know what works. And that means equally, as you said, which is the whole thing about which I think it's something I really one of the things when I lived, I've had the fortune to live around the world. One of the things I really did love about when I did in South America is they did do a lot. They did focus a lot on teaching kids this whole kind of some sort of form of sort of martial defense sort of thing. And I think if kids were taught that just at a very talk about education earlier on, if kids were taught that at that very age, because it make you realize of like, it doesn't matter if you're small, tall, fat, anything you like, you can defend yourself against another human being if you find the right way, instead of just being pushed down one path. And that's what I love about M&A. It's the ability for anybody to sort of understand that whatever you are, you have the power, which is exactly. Once human beings get that in a physical level, that they have the ability to understand, like, oh wow, I control this operating system, and then they can transmute that into my mind. If I can control my mind and operate this system, maybe I can control and I can use that to formulate other things, and that's why I think it's a really empowering thing.
Yeah, absolutely, and with things like MMA, for example, you're going to see things that change the human race for the better in ways that you hadn't even thought of, right? So so even if you look past the confidence and you look past all of that, take for example fear. Fear drives human beings to do some sick things.
Mm-hmm.
Fear drives people. Like in fights, it drives people to bash somebody's head in with a rock because they're worried that they're going to get killed. But you don't have that fear when you know how to fight. When you know how to fight, you know that the worst case scenario, you're never going to be in a situation where you're not going to be in too bad of a situation because you know you can defend yourself. But let's just say even if the playing field was more even, where the other person also knows how to fight, you know what? If just think about this: if everyone in the world knew how to fight, would they fight?
Mm.
You know, would there be reason to?
Exactly.
Or would they just fight in a sporting event just to compete with each other? Like, would you see people running away if they see somebody getting hurt? You know, would they jump in and would they step in and they say, no, you know, this is not going to happen? Would they defend each other? Like, if you don't know how to fight, you're going to have fear play a huge role, dictate a huge part of your life. But if you know how to fight, if you learn the science behind it, now all of a sudden you're going to defend someone that's in trouble. So as a human race, these little things, it might seem innocuous. It might seem like just, oh well, they're just learning how to fight. Well, no, actually they're transforming themselves as people that would actually, I would love to get to know better. You know, I would love to interact with better. I know that they're not going to leave me stranded getting my ass kicked somewhere. You know, I know that they're going to be better human beings in the long run, right? So because they're not governed by fear.
Exactly. I mean, I think the perfect example. I mean, I don't think you have to give you an answer to that as a theoretical. Yes, Bruce Lee. I mean, man, when I grew up, man, that was it. Bruce Lee came around, and then suddenly you're like, I don't know, and I'm just being very honest. I'll just be very. It was like, whoa! Every Chinese kid knows karate. So I'm not going to pick on. And I thought, if you're a Chinese kid, that must be really, or an Asian kid being brought up in a Western world where you're being bullied and called all sorts of names, and then suddenly this guy he's saying to you, you know, and then. He must be so empowered. I remember being as a kid thinking, this must empower so many people, because it empowered me as a kid, thinking, wow. Do you know what I mean? So yes, the answer to that is yes, and we've seen this. If you just give human beings that, it really does make them, because it gives whole people either way, because it suddenly makes people. I think that's the other thing. It makes the other people think twice. I mean, that was one of the things I learned from my karate years. That was my lesson. My guy used to say to me all the time. He says, you know, you've reached the top of what you're doing is when, you know, basically never to get involved in a fight. Every fight can be avoided. Do you know what I mean? I've been in situations, you know, I've seen that myself, and it's amazing. That's what I'm saying, which is the other thing, which is, I think it's really why I think this can be encouraged about, this whole M&A and understanding what the capabilities of the human being is, because you understand at times, even if you haven't got it inside you, because at that moment when you're being attacked, like you said, Neil, you're either going to freeze, the old flight or flight. But even if you freeze, you can learn to take punches, and if you can just stand up, because half the damage it's done to a lot of people, and I see it all the time. I used to live in Leeds in England, huge, great big city, and you see people getting in fights all the time, and the damage was done was when human being's skull hits a pavement. Nobody in that situation has a clue how to defend themselves or fight, and like you say, and then damage is done. But a lot of it is just defense, and that's what I'm saying, just learning to basically avoid that situation, which is, I think, it's a really good lesson for everybody to learn, that you can avoid it, and that goes beyond the, okay, I can defend myself and get into, but as I was taught as a kid, use your noggin, get out of that situation. Don't be in that situation, or even be aware not even to walk into that situation. Do you know what I mean? Which is, I think, about programming the human body and the human mind to understand the environment is in, instead of just walking around like this weak, lazy machine and thinking, wandering into situations that you would never do, because it's inevitable. You walk around a certain part of any city in the Western world after 2 o'clock in the morning, walking around with a big shiny handbag or your big bag and your coat with bling bling all over you. It's a pretty good chance you're going to get someone attacking you. Do you know what I mean? But people think that because they think, and that's what I mean. It's all about that whole intrinsic thing. So I've got to ask someone who's into sort of M&A, and you touched on the USA. What's your thought on I fought you for a fighter, Conor McGregor, man. The fighting Irishman. What's your thought on that guy? Because he's like Bovril, or he's a black and white thing for because some people can't stand him, and other people think he's a absolute love. I personally think I think he's just typical Irish, and I think he's brilliant. The way he winds up, I think that's the edge he's got. The way he winds people up and just gets inside the head, and I think half of his fights are done even before he gets in the ring. I think that's what he's one of the masters at.
I think Conor McGregor is an amazing fighter. In fact, just the way he fights, it very much feels like he's like an evolution to fighting. It's almost like he can see punches coming faster than the other person. I don't know if that makes quite sense, but it's like there's like 150 microsecond or whatever response time in which, so when you throw a punch, you're not exactly going to see it in fast enough time to get out of the way unless you're constantly, like your muscle memory and everything is adapted to that. The way he moves, it's just so fluid, and he brings this karate style in his mixed martial arts. I think quite frankly he's the evolution to mixed martial arts, just like John Jones, just like some of the other ones, the other fighters that you see that are not just fast, they are moving more intelligently, and he's a brilliant fighter. His trash talking I'm not a fan of. I'm just not a fan of trash talking in general, but he is very good. I can't wait to see him fight Jose Aldo again. I do want to see a rematch, but yeah, he's a brilliant fighter. He's just amazing.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm not a fan of the trash talk at all, but what I'm saying, he's obviously worked that out. That's a very good key because he gets inside people's heads, and as I'm saying, by the time he walks into that ring, he's I think he's already won the battle. But I mean, in every fight I've ever seen Conor McGregor, I think he just walks in there, and it's going to be interesting when he comes against an opponent who basically, a bit like, it's a perfect analogy to what's happened recently. The Ronda Rousey Kelly Holmes fight. I mean, perfect exact. She was all giving it all that, and she just stood there, and it was, and people were shocked by it. But that's what I'm saying. It's gonna be interesting when Conor McGregor comes across an opponent that's not going to be wound up by all that. Just like when Ronda Rousey found out. Whether that person comes up, it will eventually, because someone will be. That's the point. It's always this constant evolution.
Yeah, absolutely. You're pitting your body, to learning more. And the Holly Holm fight, the Ronda Rousey fight, that was amazing. Just the way she executed her kickboxing, it was amazing. She kept her at a distance, and then she threw that punch. She kept her at a distance and threw that punch. She kept nailing her every single time with those punches. And it was beautiful the way she threw kicks. She even took her down. And Ronda Rousey is an amazing jiu-jitsu practitioner. So she takes down guys double her, twice her size. And she takes down mixed martial artists that are twice her size, guys. And in jiu-jitsu, she's an Olympian judoka, and she is that combined with her knowledge in Brazilian jiu-jitsu makes her so tough. Holly Holm still took her down. It was, like I said, people are just getting better. It's an evolution, and this is what I like to see. It's not necessarily about what nature-given talents are. I mean, to some degree, I think everyone can elevate themselves. Elevate themselves to be as good as them. They can, and it's just a matter of effort. There's genetics to play in some degree, but for the most part, mixed martial arts allows you to, if you put in the effort that these guys are putting in, you will be very, very good. You may not be good enough to beat them. Maybe you might, though. So it's just about putting in that effort. And it's a science. That's what I love about it. It's a science. It's not a caveman world. It's a world that we're going into where the amount of knowledge that you have dictates how you interact with people, how you what you get from the planet, what you get from the world, and So yeah, that knowledge sharing is it all boils down to knowledge sharing, and if we can encourage everyone to kind of help each other succeed, and that's what I love about mixed martial arts. That actually does happen. It is a very camaraderie type of sport, you know.
Well, I think
You know,
oh, sorry, go on, Rich. Go ahead, Rich.
I was going to say it'd be cool to see somebody create an application, an app that allowed for a decentralized fight club of sorts. You know, so there's no, you know, you could decide going in what the rules are, but they're not set by some agency that says, oh, you have to do this or you have to do that. And yeah, that would be kind of an interesting idea.
Yeah, I was actually working on something similar to that a while back. I actually had the domain name. I think it kind of lapsed now. It was called youfight.me, and what it was exactly that. It was this. It was supposed to be this decentralized way of solving your problems. So like if anyone wanted to fight each other, they could do it in a cage with a referee, and instead of doing it out in the streets, and they could televise it so that they could actually get people following them as well. Even in school, high schools, I wanted to try to find a solution around the bullying problem, and you know, fighting in schools, because those fights can get very, very dangerous. And like, you know, you had mentioned, like, getting knocked down and the fall of hitting your head against the concrete. There are lots of problems with the way people currently fight. If you had these MMA gloves, and you had a referee, and you had a ringside doctor, and you had all of these things, and you had this notion, this form of respect, that if the second the person taps out and they're done, you don't keep hitting them. You know, the fight is over, you are done. You took your shot at it, and the other person was just better. So what? It's not a big deal. You know, we win and lose, but the main thing is you stop fighting once. You know, you have that form of respect. You're not trying to just beat somebody down so they will never be able to walk again. You know, and that's that thinking, which I believe it's the primitive brain. You know, your fight or flight response.
Yeah, some people see red when they get angry, and they lose all common sense, and they just it's almost a disorder.
It's very scary what a human being is capable of doing, and in that level of violence and that level of disregard for somebody's human, like, the health, is why I was creating that. But I didn't go anywhere with it. I actually reached out to, so while I was creating that, I reached out to George St. Pierre's camp in Montreal, TriStar, Farhaz Zahibi, yeah, that guy, the trainer of GSP. And you know, I told him about what I was trying to do, and he got back to me on LinkedIn. He actually said, yeah, you know, he's also trying to do the same thing, but then it kind of the conversations never went anywhere after that. It was just like, oh yeah, it's pretty cool, but and then I also was focusing on other things. But I do think that somebody who does a decentralized fighting network, something where you're promoting the good parts of MMA and
it streams on the Safe Network.
Yeah, safe network, safe fighting network. There you go. You know, you're not having Dana White or UFC dictate, you know, whether something's popular or not, whether a fight is popular or not, and pay the fighters peanuts. You know, it can be, hey, you guys are fighting. You guys want to fight.
Everybody who watches is handing over SafeCoin to the fighters as they watch.
It's perfect. It's a great use case for the SafeCoin.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Which you could have literally, then you could have you know, the world's first two completely decentralized safe network fighters, where people have funded them right from the very beginning. They've rewarded them for every mile they've taken, right to that pinnacle where they're on the stage. You know what I mean? One of the things I think fascinating, just sort of, you know, on the Ronda Rousey one, I think what was fascinating about that as I mentioned, from a sport that, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago was a very just, you know, seen as a rough and tumble kind of like backstreet sort of organisation. There he was in the end of 2015, and 70,000 odd people turning up to watch two females fight, and not once was it made. And I thought, that isn't such a shining light to the power of human beings, because if I had a daughter, I'd be going, not only do I want you to learn some mixed martial arts and some fighting skills, but that's your role model. Not, it's telling you as a human being you haven't got to be. Which brings you right back to what you were saying in the beginning of this conversation, Neil. Not the paradigm of Disney and that you're just a princess waiting till he sweats off your feet. You can be a machine that can beat the crap out of men. Do you know what I mean? Or you can beat the crap out of anything. And that's what I'm saying. That's what I found absolutely fascinating about that Ronda Rousey thing. Was like, wow, there was 70,000 people, and they weren't turning up for some freak show to watch, like something, two girls was running around in oil or something. It was people turning up to watch two of the best human beings take each other on, and nobody was really considered about, it was a male or a female, and that was such an empowering thing. And I thought, in one stroke, Ronda Rousey and like you say, that fight alone, I'd imagine it was probably did more for female empowerment than Kim Kardashian or any of them, right. Like you said at the very beginning, because that must have been. I was just thinking, if I was a girl anywhere around the world, any part of the world, just watching that and thinking that's something to strive for, rather than being some sort of vacuous, waiting for a moment to come on TV. And because the difference is, and this is what I love about the whole of what we're discussing with this, and particularly whether it's Ronda Rousey or whether it's Conor McGregor or any of those guys or any of this, what it's showing is, and that the whole discipline of anything is, it's all about effort put in. You can't just wake up one morning and go, right, I'm going to be Ronda Rousey and kick the shit out of everybody. No. You've got to put a lot of hours in, and that's like life. Whether it's building a program, whether you're developing a game on the internet. You can't just wake up one morning. It's going to be done. It's when you realizing it takes a lot of effort to make something, and half of it as well is fighting that resistance. That's one of the things I learned from my years. It's getting up that morning when it's cold and it's wet and you have to go out, and that's the fight, and that's the discipline. And this is why I think you're saying earlier on about it's maybe viewed as a caveman thing. Well, I think really that's just a small-minded thing about how we are now, because if anyone understood about anything about ancient cultures, what's it always been about? Yoga, understanding about how this meat machine does feed our minds, and it's all about, this is, that's what I'm saying. We're just starting to understand things that really, I think, of knowledge that have been on this planet for a long time. And that's what I love about the times is, we've now got people in all these different parts of the world feeding in, and that's what I'm saying. I think M&A is a perfect example for what whole of decentralization is impossible. Is exactly, it's like the physical form of it, and that you can just gain a bit of knowledge and this, and also forget other bits. That's what I'm saying. It's all about making use of what's good for you, and that's what I'm saying. And it's that whole process which we all have to go through, which is what you were saying earlier on, Neil. It's you've got to put the effort in. You've got to put those hours of sweating. That's for everything. And I think it's a really valuable lesson to teach everybody in life, because the paradigm teaches you at the moment that you go along, you look shiny, you have your one moment on X Factor, and that's your life. And it's a lie. That's the biggest lie we've been fed in this paradigm, that you don't have to work for anything. It's just going to be handed to you on a plate because you have your moment, and that's just not the truth.
No, you're right.
So one of the things I had to ask you, particularly Neil, and I'd like to ask anyone, particularly anyone who's developing games and stuff like that, and this is sort of wrapping this this conversation up. Do you, or what's your thoughts on, are we living in a computer simulation?
Yeah. Well, okay. So I'm open to a lot of theories these days, of course. And I'd say simulation or not, we would have the same problems we face today, simply from human nature's desire for power and control. But let's entertain the notion of us living in a computer simulation. Like so this goes back to my days as a game programmer. So if I were to design a simulation, I would design it to be very efficient in the way objects are processed, in the way particles are rendered, and et cetera, et cetera. And then you take the way our current world works. Take the electron double slit experiment, for example, right? Are you familiar with the?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So for those that aren't, they had this double slit that they shot electrons through, and they had this observer screen in the observer screen behind it. And when there was no observer, when they shot electrons, it basically went through those double slits, but it went through the entire thing. It didn't matter whether those slits were there or not. It created this interference pattern or this wave pattern, and effectively the electrons were in undefined states. They were like they could be in any random state. It didn't matter when it hit the back of the screen. The second you observed it, it went through the two slits, right? So that would be how I would design. And in fact, this doesn't just work for electrons. It works for they've done it with molecules that have like 800 plus atoms in it, and they've done the same experiment, and the same thing happened. So it's just harder when you go to larger size objects, right? But that behavior of only processing something when it is making a meaningful thing, meaning if it's making a meaningful difference, like for example, in games we have collision detection. Collision detection is an expensive process in which you are determining if one object collides with another object. Now, if you can't see any of those objects, and if they have no relation, they have nothing that deals with the calculations that you're going to do, if you just let them, if you don't give them a defined state, they just do, they're just in an undefined state, and they don't take any processing power. You don't have to bother with rendering them. You don't have to bother with doing any computations on them. You just let them be in an undefined state. Once you look at them, now suddenly they're in a defined state. They actually collide with things. They actually do these things. Now that is something that I would design as an engineer. I mean, as a video game engineer, if I was designing a simulation for everyone to live in, that's how I would do it. If you're not looking at something, why would I process it? Why would I render it? You know.
So to add, if you're on a roll, don't let me interrupt you. But
no, go
I
for
guess
it.
what I was going to say. So basically, what I hear you saying is you feel like this is an intelligently designed universe, perhaps? Is that how you feel?
Yeah, I think that, well, I mean, I'd say it's how I as a programmer would have designed it. And actually any game programmer that has done any kind of game engine, you know, would have, even if you take Eric, for example, he's done a lot of stuff in video games, right? But yeah, I mean, it is how you would do things, right? You would spatially partition your world in such a way that when you're looking at certain parts of the world, you're not rendering the other parts. You know, you're not bothering with the triangles, feeding those triangles to the graphics engine. You're not, oh sorry, not graphics engine, your video card, your graphics card. You're not bothering with those things because there's no way you're going to be able to take all that information and throw it at the graphics card. You'd get like less than a frame per second. Some of these worlds in the newer games, even take the game that he was working on, Grand Theft Auto, you know, there's way too much information. There's no way you would get a decent frame rate if you were to do that. Now, you bring that back to the simulated world. If I were to do that, that seems like the most efficient way. So yeah, I think that from at least that quantum physics point of view, I would say that kind of gives a little bit more more data to back a simulated computer simulation as opposed to, you know, real world. Because in reality, one would think that it doesn't matter whether you're looking at something or not. It just happens, right? It's an event that you set in motion. It's an event that's going to happen, but that's not what's happening. That's not what we're seeing. So I don't know. How do you explain it?
It sounds like it goes back to that if a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody there to hear it, doesn't make a sound. But I mean, it sounds like what happens at the photon level is different than what happens on, like you say, on the massive amount of elements. You know, if there's too many elements, then maybe it doesn't take a a human to observe it. Maybe it's an animal or a tree to observe it as well. So lending credence to the idea that maybe anything that's alive and has consciousness is somehow affecting the essence of everything, right?
Actually, that's actually in fact what fundamentally quantum theory states. Quantum theory states that particles exist in an undefined state of potentialities, and they don't become real until an observer interacts with them. Well, that observer is basically a mind. Until a mind interacts with them, that mind could be of an animal, could be of anything, but that's effectively what quantum theory already states. So I would say that, yeah, I would say that's a very apt definition. Yeah. So an animal observing it would count. You know, anything that observes it with a mind would count, or consciousness, if you will.
Well, I've always sort of seen it as if there was a universal consciousness, you know, despite the fact I knew everything about, you know, I was omnipotent, the first thing I would want to do is fractalize myself into in an infinite amount of my consciousness, into an infinite amount of bits, and then experience myself, and, you know, maybe in the knowledge that eventually we're going to it's all going to form back, like we were saying earlier on. You put things in a Petri dish, they will form, and I think that's maybe what it is. And I think this maybe the whole thing of this conversation has been about tonight, that we are just basically, that's one thing we know. We are just the consciousness, and the fact that we can have this conversation, and we're even discussing it. That's what I'm saying. Whether it's a simulation, and I'm just a simulation inside a simulation. Well, hey ho! At least in this point in the game, we've actually got to the point where we're discovering that we are in a simulation, and we can just talk about it. So maybe if we're just a simulation in a game somewhere, we're all reaching a certain level, and this is the whole point. So I don't know. That's how I think about it. I just think it's just fractalized. That's why I've always sort of seen this. I've always seen everything in the world that's, whether it's a structure, whether it's an organization, whether it's a building, everything can be judged by a simple process. Is it with nature or against nature? Because nature itself is just this whole consciousness experiencing itself from many different angles, and that's when I see things that I always see, like we're saying earlier on, whether it's centralization of food, whether it's centralization of the internet, knowledge, or anything else. That's just against nature, because nature doesn't work that way around. Nature's just the consciousness experiencing itself in many different ways, and I think that's the nature of where we are, whether we're in a simulation or not. To me, it's not really important. What's important to me is just this moment we're right now, because when it boils down to, you know, now is always. This is it. The present. There's the future is the future. The past. It's right now. This is the most important thing, and it's these conversations and us expanding as a species in the moment we are in right now. Well, look, Neil, I'm going to sort of wrap this conversation up, only because it's, you know, 3:15 in the morning my end, and it's been a really long day for me today. So look, there's a couple of things I want to sort of, you know, before we do wrap up, just one generally to the community out there, and I'm aware that, you know, and especially around the sort of Save network and the forum around that, but just generally the whole sort of community with you know, people building stuff for the, you know, especially around the sort of decentralization of the internet. What advice or tips would you give to anybody out there? I speak this. I'm asking you on a personal level. You know, we're trying to build an app, and what advice would you give to people who are, you know, like myself, who are going out there, have no experience of building anything before, you know what I mean, or just anybody listening to this in the future or now, and then they think, I've got a really good idea, but I don't know how to do it. What advice would from someone who's gone out there and built successful games and stuff, what advice would be to people who, you know, maybe listen to this and think, I really want to step into that world, but I'm not sure what to do. So what would your advice be to those people?
Well, my advice would be to first look at the system that you're developing your game or application on. Understand the limitations of the system, the limitations as it currently exists. So if you're building something on the Safe network, there are limitations currently, because it's just the nature of building an application. Limitations with Safe network, you have to also understand the attacks that can be perpetrated on a network, such as a Kademlia, right? So Sybil attack, or whatever. So there are pros and cons. Get a good understanding of that. Don't just assume that, oh, well, I'm going to create something that's going to work as perfectly as it would in a centralized environment. And then I would say partner with software engineers and partner with people that could do those things, and maybe they would like to have insight in other areas that you can provide, and constantly read and learn about how this thing that you're creating is going to impact society, how it's going to impact the people. Because ultimately what you're doing is you're creating an application or game or whatever that is getting peers to interact with each other, right? So think very strongly about how that process is going to happen. And do a fair bit of design, invest a good deal of time into the design aspect of it, invest a good deal of time into the psychological aspect of how the peers are interacting with each other, and then go ahead and build it.
Okay, and on the flip of that then, which is a flip sort of side to that question really, is there anything, with what the various projects you're working on, is there anything particularly that you're wanting from the community, or is there anything that you're particularly looking out there that that you can put the call out and say what you're looking for, so people can come along and if they've got those skills or that knowledge that could come and find you? And the second part of that question is, if they do have that, and just generally, where can people reach out and find you? I know you're not sort of on Twitter and stuff, and there are ways, but again, just both those sort of questions,
Yeah, I'd say one thing that I would take from the decentralized the community is, okay, so building decentralized applications is not easy. So if I were to ask for something from the Safe Network, it would be to build an example app, if you will, a hello world application, a very simple application that somebody can look at and go, okay, well, this is interacting with a lot of peers. I can write some, I can build on this. This is a simple application, simple example application that works. That would be one thing that would have very profound. That would have a very profound impact on the decentralized community of app builders. And in terms of getting in touch with me, you can email me. I'm available via email and and Facebook as well. Although I'm mostly very easy to get a hold of via email. And you feel free to share that email. It's nharan81.
Fantastic.
@gmail.com.
Brilliant. Well, Neil, it's been an absolute insightful conversation tonight, and again, I say this to you. You're all, anytime you want to come back on or anything you want to, man, the door's always open, and I think it's. As I said tonight, we kind of scratched on a few sort of things, and there's plenty more rabbit holes and plenty more we could sit and discuss, and so again, I look forward to picking up this conversation in the future. But like I say, it's been, before we do wrap this up, and I really want to give the sort of the last word to you really, and I kind of really want to maybe in one paragraph or kind of how. How would you sort of wrap up the whole of this sort of conversation, and what would be the parting message you want sort of people maybe listen to this kind of sort of walk away with?
I would say keep an open mind. Leave the ego at the door. Just leave, as much as possible. Try to accept the fact that there's a lot that we don't know. And be open to learning as much as possible. Don't be afraid of learning as much as possible. That's what I would say. Is that if you can do that, and embrace things that are different, embrace ideologies that are different, and use logic and reason to try to see how you can make the world a better place. Don't just think about your desire for money, but think about the impact that you're going to have on the society and collectively as a human race, how we elevate ourselves as a species. Look to doing that, and you will find financial gains as well when you think about solutions that help the world. People are going to be more supportive to your solutions as well in that process. So, yeah, think collectively as a human species and human race, and look to helping the world.
Well, fantastic. I can't think of a better sort of summary of what we discussed, than you just said there, my friend. And that, I mean, again, just plays into this very element, and this is what I'm going to wrap this up with. Life is people, people.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.